I'm going to come at this from an international business perspective. I teach international business at the Gustavson School, and I do have to say, long before Robin even asked me to participate in the panel, I actually made this issue the term project for my class. They are all working very hard, I'm sure, on solving this issue. I was a little bit split if I should, I do see that there are some of my students here, and at first I was thinking, I really shouldn't give away anything that they can then use in the assignment, but now I'm starting to think, maybe I should reward the students that actually bothered to show up and listen to me talk, right? Basically, when I was looking at the Rana Plaza tragedy and looking at how it relates to the research that I do, I tend to do research on really, really poor countries, and I just happened to, about a week ago, submit a paper for publication on Bangladesh, not on this issue, but I'm going to try to bring it in a little bit. But when I was preparing this talk, the thing that kind of jumped out at me, I was reading a news article from Bloomberg Business Week that basically said that, kind of as expected, we had this horrible tragedy in Bangladesh, and as soon as the tragedy occurred, there were these renewed calls, and we see this, every time something like this happens. People start calling out and saying, okay, corporations need to start doing something about this. And there's this big frenzy and everything. We saw, I think some of the panelists already mentioned it, we saw this with Nike 20 some odd years ago, we saw it with Apple just a year or two ago, and we're seeing it again now with Walmart and H&M and other organizations that deal with Rana Plaza. And as a result, the corporations say, oh my gosh, we have these people that are now going to look at us disfavorably, so we got to do something about it. So the corporations start responding, and in the case of the Rana Plaza tragedy, as was already mentioned, these corporations came together and they said, okay, we're going to start creating these like larger organizations or networks or whatever that we can use to coordinate and come up with codes and self-regulation. And some of the ones that have been created are the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh, the Alliance for Bangladesh Workers' Safety. There's other ones that are kind of floating around out there. And they say, this is it, this time we're going to solve the problem. Now here we are 6 months later, and despite over 1,000 people dying, despite this huge tragedy, and despite the promises from the corporations, to date not a single factory has actually ever been inspected as a result of this. And so when I looked at this, the question that jumped into my mind is, why is this? So I guess there's really two questions. One is why is this the case? If these companies promised that they were going to finally do something about it this time, why is it that they failed to do that? And then maybe spend just a few minutes talking about some of the findings from my own personal research that might yield some clues as to what we might be able to do about this. So basically the first question is why is it that this is the case? And I think kind of the natural tendency that we all have is that we say, well, it's because Walmart is evil, or because Nike is evil. There's just these bad people there that are doing these really horrible things. And I think that is kind of our gut reaction is, it's because of corporate greed, it's because of just bad people. And the point is absolutely there are some companies that are just, bad companies. And we all saw examples of this with like Enron, WorldCom, Bernie Madoff, who are people that are in these organizations that honestly do set out to hurt people or to scam people. But in general, a lot of research is coming out of this area of research called organization theory, is finding that for most companies that's just really not the case. And one of the seminal studies that looked at this is by a man that some people consider to be one of the godfathers of organization theory. And he did a study on the Tennessee Valley Authority in the United States, and looking at why the Tennessee Valley Authority kind of got off track from its original mission of what it was intended to do. And what Selznick, this godfather of organization theory, found is that in the Tennessee Valley Authority, the people in the organization itself it's not that they were bad people, it's that this nature of organization creates these kind of inherent tensions that employees have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So in trying to meet my daily quotas or my daily measurements or things like that, I have to make these trade-offs between some broad ideal that maybe we're striving for in the long run versus am I going to get my measurements done today? And because of this trade-off, most people are forced to kind of focus on the day-to-day stuff. And as a result, these ideals and everything tend to drift away. And so, I have it here. When the trade-off occurs, employees are often forced to focus on the routine functions rather than professed goals. Now, in developed countries, we kind of recognize this. So, here in Canada, we say, okay, we see that there's kind of this inherent flaw in organization. That, if left to their own devices, organizations do have a tendency to kind of drift and do things that they're not supposed to do. And so we say, all right, well, we're going to create a third party, another entity that has the ability and the capacity to kind of watch over things and make sure that this pursuit of the day-to-day activities doesn't lead to horrible things like the Rana Plaza tragedy. And that organization that we call on is the government. And here in Canada, you can see that. In the United States, we can see that. Enron came out and scammed all kinds of people and cooked their books and everything. And the U.S. government responded, and they came out with Sarbanes-Oxley. And you can debate, how effective that was. But the fact of the matter is that the U.S. government, that's, part of its function is to kind of watch over these organizations. Now, when we start talking about globalization, the challenge is that a lot of these companies are operating in countries where that function is not being provided. You go to Bangladesh, and the government has an incapacity to provide that third-party oversight to make sure that that this function is being provided. So a lot of people start saying, okay, well, now we need to find an alternative because organizations, they're getting off track. Government is what is supposed to come in and keep these organizations in line. That function isn't being fulfilled in countries like Bangladesh, so we need some kind of global governance. And so a lot of people have started to call for private regulation as an alternative to this weak government that we find in Bangladesh because the government can't fulfill that function there. And so so that's why we get this rise of people saying, okay, Walmart, you need to organize this like industry group. And Walmart says, okay, we're going to do all these things, but in the end it doesn't work because in the end organization is not very good at doing this. So there's some studies that have come out where Locke and Romas and Bartley, who are some fairly famous researchers in business schools, and they've come up with they've tried to look at private regulation as an alternative to government regulation. And what they found is that there's a few reasons why private regulation doesn't really work all that well. So, suppliers will often just meet the minimum standards. Often, what they found is that these suppliers will just they'll improve when there's an audit coming through, and then they'll fall back. Multinational corporations are very poorly designed to provide this oversight that a government is supposed to provide. So they have to build new capabilities. This is really expensive. They need to get information from suppliers who are operating in places where the government doesn't require it. And so it creates all these challenges to private regulation. And so I call this a paradox. A paradox of private regulation is that we really need the government to provide this. What these scholars found is that private regulation does work, but it's a supplement. It works together with strong government regulation and strong government oversight. Private regulation may not be a solution in these countries where the government just simply does not work. So just because I'm down to about a minute left now, this is the challenge, this is the problem. And so I think I don't have a whole lot of answers specifically on the case of the garment industry, but basically I think that the point that I'm trying to make with this presentation is that our gut feeling is to focus on the companies and to say they're evil, they need to get their act together. But what a lot of my research is finding, and what a lot of the research that I'm building my research on, is finding that there might be a need to shift, that we cannot avoid the state. We can't avoid the government. And so we might need to start looking at strategies of how do we bring the government in and make the government a part of the solution. Despite its weaknesses, the government cannot be avoided. The government, even the weak government that we find in Bangladesh. Just a quick example, I'm not going to go into it, but I actually just submitted a study on the government of Bangladesh in another industry, in microfinance. And one of the reasons that I argue in the paper that microfinance has been so successful in Bangladesh is because the founder of microfinance there, who's Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for it, he took a very long time working with this weak and corrupt state in Bangladesh to create the proper regulations, because he knew this tendency of organization to start to drift away. And so the point that comes out of this paper, I think that we as people, when we see a tragedy like this, we want an immediate solution. We want something that we can say, okay, we're going to fix this. But the problem is, and the punchline from this paper, is that those that have succeeded in doing it, it's been a very long, a very arduous process, but that's what's going to ensure the sustainability of these kinds of programs to prevent these problems in the future, rather than just these flare-ups that we find where 1,000 people die, so now we're going to throw something at it, and then when everything settles, we'll stop doing it, and then something else happens, and then we throw something at it. It's more of this long-term, slow, patient process. Might not be completely palatable, but I think that that's the solution if we're going to solve this over the long run. Thank you very much.